When things used to get really bad or whatnot, the aphorism was, it don't mean nothing.
It don't mean nothing didn't mean it wasn't real. It meant you kept moving anyway.
And that just means just keep putting one foot in front of the other. You know what I mean? It's just another thing that happened. And
Glenn Murphy didn't grow up with a dramatic backstory.
I did live my early years in Roxbury, and we moved out to Newton probably 1953. So I was between worlds, as it were.
There was no moment where war or the draft became destiny. It was simply what came next.
It was just another thing. It was just done.
He wasn't eager. He wasn't defiant. He wasn't afraid enough to run.
It wasn't, yippee, we're all going to die, but they ended up drafting me. In the Army, attached to the 101st Airborne. It was unexpected, you know what I mean? But it wasn't. We landed in Da Nang. Da Nang was a big, stinky shithole.
No cinematic arrival was there to greet Mr. Glenn Murphy, but rather just heat, smell, and uncertainty.
In essence, the place it was boredom interrupted by crisis.
Mr. Murphy's time in Vietnam wasn't just characterized by glory, but also the mundane.
We were in the bunkers 6 days a week, and there was night duty in there from 11 to 12, like until the morning. Well on the perimeter, what we would do is probably every 2 or 3 days on a rotating basis, maybe 4. Outside the wire at night, you had to set up like either an ambush or a listening post. People get hurt if you didn't do what you're supposed to do.
However, the danger wasn't constant, which only made it worse.
But that's what makes it doubly dangerous, as I say. If you take your eye off the ball, or you end up like Charlie Brown on your ass. I mean, I can laugh about it now. I laughed about it and bitched about it over there.
When Mr. Murphy brought up a particular mission or incident that still felt vivid for him, he brought up something in a way that I wasn't quite expecting.
And I saw one guy shot in the head. His name was Danny Carter. He was from Kansas. He was in a fighting hole. He wasn't in the same bunker that I was, but he was one bunker over. And I was in between them. They had like fighting holes or whatnot. But that wasn't the type of engagement that I saw over there. Very rarely did you see what you were shooting at. It wasn't that type of a war. It used to bother me when I got back, but it didn't really bother me there. Shit like that when it happened there, it just made you angry.
Of course, anger couldn't have been the only thing Mr. Glenn Murphy had to cope with tragedy. Humor, therefore, often came as well.
You either laugh or you yell. I mean, it's just, like I said, it don't mean nothing. What are you going to do?
This mentality wasn't denial, but determination. Not all humor was exactly lighthearted. In fact, it was mainly disheartening. This led to tragedy that was spun as comedy.
I'll tell you about an incident like where somebody got fragged. Very strange. We got this guy that came in, and as I said, we didn't spend a lot of time like back in like the company area or whatnot. We were like out, as I said, headed up towards the DMZ, or we just stayed out on the perimeter. We were happy, they were happy. It was like Planet of the Apes, right? We got this first sergeant. The leadership, it sucked. I mean, these people were inept. I mean, it wasn't like F Troop, right? But it was closer to that than it was to what it should be, I guess. I didn't know who the heck he was. He came from Germany, right? I mean, this guy thought he was like back at like Fort Bragg, right? This guy was really busting balls. He thought that, as long as everybody did their job and whatnot, it was the Army, but it wasn't, well, I haven't had a pair of socks in a month and you're worried about my boots. So this guy's busting balls and busting balls and busting balls. So he actually got me once. We came in the perimeter, and I looked like something out of a Village People concert. I had on like a boonie hat, right? I had web gear. I had on a bathing suit like that had hearts on it, and a pair of combat boots, right? So we pull in and we park by the company area. So this guy comes over and he goes, "Hey, I go, yeah, what do you want? The guy goes, what are you doing dressed like that? I go, what do you mean, what am I doing dressed? What am I, a tourist? I'm in the army. What are you doing dressed like that, right? So the guy goes, who are you? I go, I don't know you, because nobody's wearing rank, right? Who are you? The guy says, well, I'm the first sergeant, right? He was my new first sergeant. I go, ah, fuck, man. So in any event, he continued like on his obnoxious ways. And one night we were out on a listening post, and about 3 o'clock in the morning, we got a call like on the radio, and it said, come in. So we go in there, and apparently somebody back in the company area, right, had taken a Claymore mine. So he pissed somebody off so much, he was in a hooch, that's where they lived. So somebody to get this sergeant, like drilled a hole under his bunk, put a Claymore mine there with a blasting cap in it, right? You know, didn't have a clicker at the end, like broke the circuit and whatnot. You know, when everybody was asleep in there, reattached the, you know, like in blue the sky. And so that's why they were calling us in, like, because they wanted everybody, like, in a particular area until they solved who got them.
Did they ever find out?
No, I think I know, but you shouldn't be messing with people like that around to the teeth. I mean, this guy was probably a better man than I, but you don't want to be messing with people.
As bad as friendly fire or fragging in a war like Vietnam could get, it wouldn't be the last time Mr. Murphy knew an instance of it. However, this time would be one where he had seen it happen right before his eyes.
We were driving into Way one day when we were off, like after the bunkers, because we'd have the day off. In Way, you know, we'd go in there and raise hell and whatnot, right? So the MPs over there, they're kind of pains in the ass, but whatever. They think, you know, they're like Barney Fife. And like I say, you don't want to mess with people that are, you know, that are armed to the teeth. So occasionally, like I said, we were probably 6-7 miles south away. So we'd drive in there, and the MPs had a couple of checkpoints and whatnot. And they could be jackasses, right? So apparently there was a truckload, I think it was probably a deuce and a half, a big, you know, truck, 4 times as big as a Jeep. The soldiers set up in the back and whatnot. And these Marines, like they had come in from like up north, I don't know, Quezon or someplace that I had heard that was a rumor. And, you know, the MP started messing with them, right? They killed them both and drove away. I don't know if they ever caught them, but you don't want to be messing with people there. I mean, you know, you're some angry people.
As much as one can analyze Vietnam for its stories or its morals, some stories just don't really have a lesson.
One morning we're sitting on the perimeter, you know, and the sun comes up and whatnot, and, you know, that's fine. The night's over. We're tired. What are we going to do? We're going to go to bed. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Okay, so somebody goes, like, down, like, to wherever the I guess you'd call it an outhouse or whatnot. And, you know, it's like secure. It's behind, like, a bunker. So this kid goes down there, right? And he goes in to go to the toilet. And, you know, we're up goofing around and whatnot. So the screwball, like that was in this bunker with me, there were different types of flares that you would use at night. There were flares that you shot up like with a mortar. There were flares that they dropped like from ships when shit was happening, you know, which light everything up, right? So this fellow that's in relieving himself after a tough night on guard, or so he thought, his problems were just beginning. This guy shot the friggin' flare right into the side of the outhouse, right? So the thing went off. But it's lucky this guy didn't get like all the phosphorus burns, like on. So he comes pouring out of the thing. The commode thing burns down. But I mean, that's funny. I'd rather think about that than a guy that got shot in the head.
You couldn't be careless. You couldn't be cruel.
You couldn't be a dick over there.
But when things did happen like that, you just kind of had to pretend it was normal. However, this didn't mean that acts of kindness couldn't happen as well.
Would be at least, like on this perimeter, at least a couple of weeks a month. Right? We'd be wandering around like one of the lost tribes of Israel for a week or two. Like I say, like guarding a convoy or doing this or doing that. You know, I can remember being on patrol with this Lieutenant Sheldon, who was probably the best like officer we had over there. He's a guy from Texas. He was a first lieutenant. And, we're patrolling around the village and whatnot. So you get to know some of the people because you've been around them, for like 8 or 9 months. So we stopped and set up a perimeter and had lunch. And I remember one kid, it was, I'm guessing 10. So if you get an extra, let's say you get a case of oranges, they need it more than you do, so you drop it in the village or whatnot. So you give this kid whatever you could give him. He's just a cute little kid. You see some families, I got to know this one family there pretty well. And, the grandmother and the aunt and the mother, the husband was probably a Viet Cong, I don't know. But they had a beautiful daughter, like a daughter that was about 13 or 14. She was Eurasian. So if you give a case of sea rations for this family, they'll either eat them or trade them or, whatever.
However, that didn't mean that Mr. Murphy didn't have his own doubts surrounding his own behavior.
But is it kindness? I don't know. Maybe I just wanted to act like a big shot. No, I mean, people are people, like I say, until they do something different and whatnot.
Like he said, it was boredom interrupted by crisis. But when that boredom ended and that crisis hit, it hit pretty hard.
If we have another war, right, good luck. Because you'll be fighting it, I won't.
Based on my time with him, I mainly took away that Glenn Murphy's experiences in Vietnam don't offer much inspiration. And while not all of his stories carry modesty, he prioritizes honesty in the ones he shares.
Yeah, like I said, humor is one of the ways that people cope with things. Irony, skepticism, what are you going to do? Sit there and cry on each other's shoulders? You can't do that either. You don't like it, like I said, back to that expression, it don't mean nothing. That's where you had to put it. I think that expression says a lot about what it was. I knew it was bothering you, you knew it was bothering me, right? But one or both of us would say it don't mean nothing.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Veterans Voices. If you know a veteran in the Newton or Boston area whose story deserves to be preserved, please reach out. I'm Ethan Lee, a Newton North High School junior preserving the stories of veterans in my community. And Mr. Glenn Murphy, you once said, "It don't mean nothing." But your story means something to me, and it means something to everyone listening here and now. Thank you for your service.